Hello, so today I'm going to be ranking all of the set 13 units on how good I think they are. Obviously this is going to be opinionated. I'm going to be sorting them by their cost, so I'm going to be making 5 separate tier lists. If you like my content, make sure to like and subscribe. And there's going to be more guides to come. This one's going to be like a little intro fun guide, and I'm going to do more like detailed comp guides and like how to climb ranked guides, like what the best comps are. It's just there's been a lot of patches recently. There's been like 3 patches in 1 week, so we're just going to start with the fun one, and then probably by the end of the weekend I'll have 1 or 2 other guides on rerolls and forecasts and that stuff. But without much ado, let's get to it. So they're in roughly alphabetical order, so if you're curious about a particular unit, you can use that to help you gauge where it is on the timeline. Amumu, I think Amumu is like a solid it's like B or A. I'm gonna put him in B, and then we'll probably switch stuff around. All the Watchers kind of like roughly get like a B tier area. Watcher as a trait is very, very strong, so even Darius kind of falls into this B tier. Darius himself doesn't do all that much, and Amumu himself doesn't do all that much, but the Watcher trait is probably one of the best frontline traits. It's just kind of tied towards lower cost units because most of the Watcher units are low cost, so it's a little bit more awkward to play around, like to cap really high. But it is one of the best traits, and if like maybe Sorcerers becomes really like a dominant trait, then you're probably going to see something like Watcher Sorcerer come up. It's really good with Kog'Maw, etc. Draven, I think, is also in that B tier. Nothing about Draven makes me think like Giga Broken. There's nothing about Draven that's like particularly great. He's really good at tempoing. He's really good at doing a lot of damage if you're playing around Conqueror. But Conqueror, I think it's, for what it is, it's very overplayed. I think it's a lot worse than it would be in general. Irelia, I think, goes in A tier. I think Irelia, even outside Sentinel, is just really, really good right now. It gives you a lot of flexible options. 6 Sentinel is very strong. The thing about Irelia that's really great is that her main ability gives her a lot of survivability because she gets like this huge shield. So I find that of all the frontline units, I feel like it's easiest to streak with somebody like Irelia. For the same reason, I'm just gonna, well, we'll get to Trundle after, but Trundle kind of follows a similar thing. Lux is S tier for sure. This Lux unit is way overtuned, does so much damage. The way that she casts is the shielding. When she casts, she makes a shield, which gives your whole board a bunch of survivability. And then when she after her cast, she then hits for like a shit ton of damage. It's like insane. She like one-shots units. She's one of the best units by far, so definitely S tier. Maddie, I'm gonna put in C tier. Maddie is like, it's good if you're playing around snipers. I think some people really, really like to play around Maddie. I don't. I've been griefed so many times by Maddie because she can miss on her ult. A lot of times if the backline starts walking or starts moving, she will literally just miss all of her shots, and it's so miserable. So I just don't have any faith in this unit, so she's in C tier. Enforcer as a trait is also pretty bad, because something like, I'll talk about it more in like later guides, but Enforcers, it's really hard to tempo with those type of boards because depending on what people's boards are made, when you play vertical Enforcer, a lot of times like the Enforcer proc is on like a backline unit, and then you can't reach it, and then Maddie, if she misses or if she doesn't kill or one shot, you just never get the Enforcer attack speed, so it's just like a mess. So like, just in general, C tier. Morgana, I think, goes in A tier. Morgana is kind of like that same realm of Lux, with just doing a bunch of damage, but I just don't think she's as high up as Lux. And then I'm gonna put Powder in C tier. I think Powder just takes too long to do damage. Powder in family reroll, there is a lot of opportunities, but I think that if you're constantly playing around Powder, like, maybe we'll put Powder in B tier because she's Scrap. Scrap is really good to tempos and Ambusher as well. So she's like a really good trait bot because she has 3 really good traits. So she always is like, you find that very often she's on a board, right? She basically perfect synergizes with Echo. So if you're ever playing around Scrap, you always want to hold on to and play a Powder. Just that early game she's pretty weak, and I think even late game she's pretty weak. But she does have utility. She gives anti-heals, so I think that's enough to put her in B tier. Singed I'll put in B tier as well. Probably a little bit of a Powder somewhere like here. Singed is pretty good. I've seen some Singed reroll variations when you're playing like Sork's rerolls and stuff like that. The problem with Singed is that I feel like compared to other Sentinels, he's always the one that you drop first. He just does the least. His buffs that he gives isn't that much, and if you're stacking Singed, he doesn't tank as hard. He's more like a support utility, but because he's in the front line, he doesn't give that much support and utility because he dies too soon. And then if you go for reroll Sork, that line isn't good right now, so maybe later it will be really prevalent. Yeah, so it just is what it is. Steb is in C tier. Same reason. I think it's just like Enforcer, just really bad as 1 cost. Steb as a bruiser is just really, really bad. I just don't like him that much. I feel like sometimes he pops off and he lives forever and he heals your whole team. But in general, I find that like unless you're dedicating Steb items, you're better off just playing another bruiser. There's so many other options. Trundle I'll put in A tier. Trundle is scrap, which is really good for tempoing. And Trundle also has the... Trundle also, because of scrap, gets a shield and does a lot of damage. He's kind of like one of those like all-arounders, like can solo everything. I feel like if you have an upgraded Trundle, a lot of times you can streak really aggressively. And especially if you're playing around scrap, you basically have a Trundle, you put an item on him, he gets 2 items, gets a shield. You know, it's a very good opener, so you always should play around it. Vex is either S tier or A tier. I'm willing to put her in S tier because of other stuff. We'll get to Violet after. I'm willing to say that she does a lot of damage. Vex has like this really massive hit, and she also does like a little bit of like spread damage, like a little bit. She's just a really, really good backline unit. If you can start off with like a vertical rebel game and with visionary as well, she's really good to like item hold for much of your game. Like Vex and Lux are definitely like, you know, right now it's a very AP focused meta. So obviously, as you can see, like the AP units are going to be really heavily favored. But a lot of the reason that that's the case is because there's a lot more AP backline units than there are AD backline units in the in terms of 1 costs. So yeah, you're probably better off playing AP flex, even if like things change later, just because like you can play your early game a little bit easier a lot of the time. Zyra, I don't know if I should put Zyra in S tier or A tier. I'm down to put her in S tier. I think Zyra also does like really, really massive damage. But I don't know. I think compared to Vex and Lux, I think Zyra's like just below. Experiment bonus doesn't really... It's pretty good, but it's not something you're necessarily going to play around early game. And Sorcerer doesn't really matter that much early game because it's only like 10 AP. It's not that much. Or like 20 AP. A lot of times, like if you have a Lux, you don't even care about putting the Sorcerer trait in, and it just is what it is. Now, as the last thing, I'm just going to make like a separate tier, like add row above. Because like Violet is just separate from all of this stuff. She is a lot better, right? She's like closer to like S tier than being like completely separate tier, but I think she still has like this degree of separation. The problem with Violet, I'll just put a little thing like a Violet. So Violet is just like the gold invested in her is crazy. She's so good as a frontline unit. The problem is it's just like a lot of times if you're playing around Violet, you have to commit to Violet. Because there's not many good melee frontline units besides like there's no 4-cost melee unit that's really good. And there's no 4-cost there's no 5-cost melee unit that's really good. So if you're building Violet items, a lot of times you're committing to either Violet reroll or some other reroll line. So that it just makes this like scenario where it's just really awkward, but she is just very, very strong. They obviously made multiple patches to try and fix Violet and make her like a little bit less overbearing. But for a 1 cost, she is ridiculous. Like if you have a spot for this comp, if you have an augment that powers up 1 cost, if you have like Welcome to the Family that you can get Violet for free, it's still a very viable strategy to play around it at all levels of play. And I think that, like, you know, if you're not holding on to Violets and playing around it, I think that's still something you can do. Obviously, basically, like, based on your opener, a lot of the times, it's basically like, okay, do I have AD items? Then I'll probably play around Violet and streak with Violet, or I have some illegal opener where I have, like, a 3 or a 4 cost, a 3 or a 2 cost that I can play around. But a lot of times, she's, like, the go-to, buy this unit, play it. Even if you're not going to reroll Violet, if you can, a lot of times, like, just putting your tank items on a Violet, you'll probably do better in your early games, is what I find. So yeah, she just gets her own tier. Hopefully it gets adjusted. I know they're working on it. I'm not as upset as I was before, because this comp does, like, you know, it does fall off really hard when you play Violet reroll to certain other comps. So, you know, once you learn how to optimize, it becomes a little bit more bearable now, like after all the nerfs and stuff. Anyways, let's go to 2 costs. So Akali, I'm going to put in A tier. I think Akali is really, really strong with rerolls. She does a lot of damage. She has good items. Like, you can make a lot of good items on her because she's like AP melee frontlines. You have a lot of flexibility on what kind of items you make on her. So she's pretty flexible in that regard. And I think she does cap really high around like playing a vertical emissary type of board. Usually you reroll Akali and Nocturne. There's some challenger level players that literally like streaked, like did nothing. I forget who it was. like correct me if I'm wrong, if someone's like a really big like watcher of TFT, was it not YBY who just did nothing but force Akali Nocturne every single game, and he just like gained like 500 LP? Like, I think there was a Sub-Zero arc video on it. I think it's YBY. I didn't watch the video, but I remember seeing that he was constantly playing it when I would watch streams. So it's definitely strong. I think it deserves A tier, even though like I think some other regions don't see Akali as being that strong. It's definitely something you should be prepared to play around if you have a spot for it. Camille though is like better Akali. She's just S tier, way too much damage. She just instantly deletes anybody. I think Camille single-handedly made them nerf one of the anomalies, the one invisibility cloak, because Camille with invisibility cloak was like an instant win, and now invisibility cloak is like every 6 seconds, so it's a little bit more like you have a window to kill the Camille. She does adaptive damage as well, Camille, so she literally will do more damage based on whichever. She'll do either AP or AD, whichever one does more damage, and that's what makes her really strong. Leona's also A tier. Leona is just Sentinel. A lot of times she's somebody that fits on your final board. A lot of times the way you can look at these like these synergies are either units that you're playing for most of your board, like this is the 1 cost, either units you're playing for most of the board or units that will find their spot on their final board. It just means that this unit is very useful, so a lot of times buying it is a correct decision, and investing gold into it is a correct decision, right? That's why that's kind of like another way you can look at this tier list. Nocturne, I think he's like, you know, like it's kind of weird. It's like these two can easily be in B tier, but I think I'm over evaluating them as putting them up in A tier. I don't think they're probably like bottom of A tier. Akali Nocturne is basically the comp that you play when you're re-rolling for quick strikers. It does cap pretty high. It does have a lot of potential. There are a lot of good augments that you can play towards it, but your spot has to be very, very good for these units. So it's like, I guess B might be more situational. So maybe I'll drop them to B tier. Because like, you know, I'm thinking about like units like these, like Leona and Rel, for example. These are units that you're just like always playing on your board. There's so many times where you just like, if you hit like Leona 2, Rel 2, that shit's staying on your board even if you make it to level 10. Because a lot of times like the Academy, you just get a free item for having Leona with Sentinel. Visionary, this is like the Heimer setup. You just play these 2 units with a Heimer and then plus 1 other Academy unit and GG. You know what I mean? So it's just like, it's just very, very strong. There's also multiple 4 costs you can play around it. Academy gives a free item. You don't have to put on an Academy unit. It can give you a lot of tempo early game. Very, very strong units. I think a lot of play. Rel, I don't have any faith in this unit. I think it's like D tier probably. Besides Chem Baron, which Chem Baron isn't even that strong. I just don't see it. Set, I think Set is really, really strong. He has a stun. His stun is massive. It can actually sway a lot of fights. Not many people are playing around Set because the Bruiser line isn't as flexible as Sentinels. Sentinels is like the go-to flex AP line because you can easily pivot into either a Zoe carry, you can pivot into like a really easily into like a Heimer carry, or even a like 5 cost like a Malzahar. You can play around Jace. Like there's lots of different options you can play around it. Bruiser's a little bit less flexible. I feel like most people are just playing Twitch or snipers around Bruisers. But of course, I think that if stuff gets a little bit more balanced and some more lines come into play, people will play Set more and then start to realize that he's really, really strong. Tristana is also A tier. I think Tristana, she has the potential to like carry a game very easily. She's very, very strong. She can scale really aggressively. There's certain augments that also accentuate that. And she's also Emissary. She gives your whole team a little bit of a speed boost, so I'm willing to put Tristana in S tier. Just for utility as well. A lot of times if you're looking for a unit to just shove on your board to cap your board a little bit higher, Emissary units are a great way to do that. You just throw in 1 Emissary and it gives you like a little bit of a team-wide buff. Tristana is arguably one of the best. The other one would be Mbessa. But Tristana literally just gives you like your whole team attack speed. It's just really, really good. Vander, S tier. This unit's like unkillable. It's fucking broken. It's so ridiculous how strong it is. I think that you should definitely like normally just like try and play around Vander. If you have an early Vander. I know that Vander, like, you know, people look at the family reroll and think about just Violet, and Vander kind of fell off since then. But before Violet was broken, the go-to family reroll was just hit a Vander 3, and the Vander 3 is unkillable. Don't let Violet being strong make you forget how strong Vander is what I would say. He's basically one of the like the best tanks for his cost. Watcher is very, very, very strong. And if you can hit vertical Watcher and you have like even a Vander 2, it's like arguably one of the better 2-star 2-cost that you can have in the game. Urgot, I don't know, Urgot's either C or B tier. I'm down to put Urgot in C tier. I just played Urgot reroll today and it felt really shit. I don't think Urgot is that great. I'm willing to put Urgot in B tier. If you don't know, Urgot sunders. So Urgot gives you armor reduction. So Urgot's really good for utility. I think as a solo carry and as a solo reroll, he used to be kind of good. There's some very niche lines, I understand. So you can play Urgot reroll and you can get like a first. Like there's a chance. But I don't think it's consistent, and I think he's not as good as the other 2 costs. If you see like a bunch of Urgots early in your shop, it's not like he's gonna streak you early game, right? If you have like an Urgot 2 and you spend 6 gold on it on stage 2, it's not the same as having like a Set 2, a Rel 2, or a Leona 2, or like a Tristana 2, which can actually carry late game, or a Vander 2, or a Camille 2, right? He's somewhere in this ballpark of like situationally good, but not necessarily always good. Vlad is in the same B tier. He's only good because he's Watcher and Black Rose. I feel like this unit himself does nothing. If you ever have a Vlad, I don't know, he just does shit all. Zeri. Zeri's like A tier. There is Zeri reroll with Kog'Maw. Zeri does a lot of damage. Zeri's very, very strong. She basically has like a thing where it's like instead of mana, she has like every 3 auto attacks or something like that. She does her cast. She's a great use of, she makes great use of like red buff, because she hits multiple units, so she applies the burn and the wound very, very well. She's very good at sundering because she applies all of that very, very well. She's great for like just item holding because you can easily play around Zeri with Watcher until you play around like a higher cost AD unit. Like you can item hold Zeri until you find like a Corki or a Twitch, so it's definitely very strong. Ziggs. I'm not putting Ziggs in C tier. I've played around Ziggs a lot. Maybe he's just B tier. I think this is fine. These units all are pretty good. I think 2 costs have a really good spot this set. Almost all of them are really, really strong and really, really nice to play around. And a lot of times having upgraded 2 costs is really, really good. But just this unit, I feel like she's good sometimes, but like, I don't know, Renata I think is just a whole tier below in terms of what she does. So I'm down to just like separate it like that. Ziggs is a little bit, like, he doesn't do that much, but he's scrap, so a lot of times you're playing with a scrap opener. It's very hard to get Dominator synergy early because all the other Dominators are 3 costs. So a lot of times you just play him for scrap, and if you're not playing scrap, the Ziggs doesn't do that much. That's the thing. If you're not playing scrap, the Ziggs doesn't really do that much. Alright, 3 costs now. 3 costs. Okay, so Blitzcrank. Blitzcrank solid like B tier, B for Blitzcrank. I think Blitzcrank, like, there are some reroll lines that you can play, like reroll Cassio Blitzcrank. It is quite strong. I think Blitzcrank, he kind of suffers from just not doing enough. I feel like his synergies aren't that great. You're never really playing Dominator with Automata, for example, to like make the Blitzcrank really like crank. He does this really cool thing where he does like, he makes units do less damage, like if units damage Blitzcrank, he'll make them all do less damage overall. So he has like this numbing effect for the enemy, which is kind of cool. I just find that I never notice it enough to like think that I want to play around Blitzcrank. So he's more of like a B tier. I feel like he's not like as good a tank as some of the other ones that you would see on this list. Cassiopeia, definitely A tier. Cassiopeia has really great synergies, Dominator and Black Rose. I feel like a lot of times you can play your early game around Cassiopeia. Cassio 3 caps really high with Black Rose as well. She's kind of a little bit of a synergy bot. But I've played a lot of Cassio reroll. I played it in PBE as well as I played it in my regular games a lot of the time. It does cap very high. I think she is a very good unit to play. But this might just be my own bias. I think if you ask most people, they'll put her in B tier as well. This is a little bit of bias. So please note, before you guys call me an idiot or whatever, because everybody seems to like doing that, it's a little bit of bias, but I definitely do think that she's really strong. And I think she's a good item holder, right? And that's the thing, right? I think item holding a Cassio for your mid game is really, really strong, especially if you have it upgraded. So yeah, she goes over there. Same with Ezreal. Ezreal I think is like solid A tier. I don't think he's like giga broken that he's like S tier or anything. But the same reason as Cassiopeia. You could play reroll Ezreal. It's not that good, but a lot of times he's like good at like just holding items until late game, and he just has good synergies as well. So same reason as Cassio, just A tier because of meta picks and stuff like that. Gangplank goes S tier for sure. Gangplank has really, really good synergies. Form Swapper, Being able to be used as a frontline and a backline unit is really, really powerful. And then alternatively, I don't have Swain. Sorry, I just noticed. I'm gonna put him in there. If I'm missing any units, just ask me and I'll say in the description. I thought I did this properly, but my bad. Gangplank, he has Scrap, which is good. Pit Fighter, they're just good synergies. A lot of times you can just find it to play a Pit Fighter. Form Swapper is very, very strong. Gangplank is strong on his own. You can play Gangplank reroll, and a lot of times he's somebody that's going to be played on your board till late game, because a lot of times if you're trying to find a unit to play to just get a free scrap value in, a lot of times Gangplank is one of the better scrap units. It just has like the triple synergies that you can just put in to try and like get some stuff going and cap out your board. So I definitely like Gangplank. I think Gangplank gets that S tier. Kog'Maw, there is a Kog'Maw reroll. It is meta, so he gets the free S tier. I don't believe in this Kog'Maw unit that much. He's S tier relative to other 3 costs. If you talk about the Kog'Maw comp in general, it's the same as like, you know, all the other 3 cost rerolls. I don't think the 3 cost rerolls are particularly strong. Like, you shouldn't just go into the game and say it's a 3 cost reroll meta. Kog'Maw, you have to have a good spot for it. There's a lot of times that you just like don't have a good spot and things are just bad. Also, I might just shuffle these down a little bit. I'm starting to think that, like, you know, because there's some units I'm seeing here that I want to put in S tier. Yeah, I think I'm gonna drop everybody 1. I'm dropping everybody 1. Because there's some units that are just way better than these. Like, Loris is A tier as well, I think. Or maybe he's, like, here. The problem is he's Enforcer, so a lot of times you're dropping him just because of synergies. But Sentinel is very strong, so he's, like, top of B tier, bottom of A tier. Nami is S tier. Emissary, shit ton of damage, giga broken, giga strong. That's why I had to drop these guys. Like, I understand Kog'Maw's a reroll line, but if you ever see Nami reroll, this unit I swear does more damage than Kog'Maw. Right? Kog'Maw reroll is so dependent on Scar, which we'll get to Scar in a little bit. Nunu's like decent. I would put Nunu in like B tier. I think Nunu reroll is pretty bad. I think Nunu 3 is pretty bad unless you have Vertical Visionary. Like, if you're 8 Visionary Nunu 3, it's pretty good, but like, come on, that's like asking a lot, you know? Swain is S tier. Swain doesn't fucking die. If you have a Swain early, like a Swain 1 will streak you all of stage 2, right? A Swain 2 will streak you all of stage 3. This unit is fucking broken. He is so incredibly strong. Every time I see a Swain, if I'm able to play my early game around a Swain, I just know that I'm going top 4. This unit is so good. He is like giga. Like Swain is the guy. Like that is guy. He's him. Straight up. Remy's really strong, A tier. If you don't play around Remy, sorry, she does like a huge stun. She's very, very strong. This guy, this Scar guy, Watcher, fucking unkillable Demon Lord. He is so strong. Like, the only reason the Kog'Maw board is half decent is because Scar lives long enough to give Kog'Maw a chance to survive. I guarantee you, like, watch Kog'Maw. If you look at your Kog'Maw board, look at if you have Kog'Maw 3, Zeri 3, Scar 3, all 3 items. If you look at the damage, Zeri will do damage, more damage than Kog'Maw for like 70% of the fight. Because the Kog'Maw takes so long to ramp up with the Archangel's Gwinsu build, like if you're going that build. And if you go for like pure damage item build, he just never reaches that level of play. But Scar is the only reason this Kog'Maw even works. If Scar wasn't a good tank, this Kog'Maw line would never work. Like, that's the main thing. Like, the Scar is way more important than the Kog'Maw. And it's not only Scar, it's mostly Watcher trait as well. All the Watchers are broken. Because if you can play 6 Watcher, it is so incredibly strong. It gives you so much damage reduction. It is nuts. So, like, the main thing you should always think about, like, this Scar is the main thing, right? So that's why, like, even though Kog'Maw's a reroll that people are going to be like, it's broken, I play it all the time, I get first. I understand that. It's mostly because of Scar. Right? It's mostly because of Scar and Watchers, so Scar gets the S tier, Kog'Maw gets the A tier. I don't want to hear about it. Smeech is like alright. I don't know where I want to put him. I kind of look at him like the same way as like a lot of these other units. I'd put him in B tier, top of B tier, bottom of A tier. Like, it's either here or here. You decide. I'm gonna put him here just for the sake of this video. Pretty good, but like, eh. And then TF is around the same spot. TF is really, really strong. Don't get me wrong, he does an insane amount of damage, this Twisted Fate, but his synergies aren't the greatest is the problem. And you're never really like dedicating yourself to a Twisted Fate reroll, especially when you're playing the other cost units, because you're more efficient rolling for like the 2 costs. Smeech is the same way. Like, Camille with Smeech is really, really strong, and a Smeech 3 does get a lot of shit done, but you're never prioritizing Smeech 3. Like, the Camille just does way more damage and is way better than the Smeech all the time. So it's like, you know, and he's Chem Baron. So like, you know, Cambrian isn't that strong right now, right? It's not nowhere close to these other ones. But I think I'm pretty happy with this list like this. Blitzcrank is also very close to B tier, but you know, we'll see how it goes. 4 cost. Mbessa is A tier. I think playing around Mbessa as like a solo carry is pretty bad a lot of the times. She's really good to tempo if you're tempoing Conqueror. That's really fun. But I don't think she's that good. The main reason that she gets A tier is because of Emissary. Her Emissary bonus is so good that she's like a very good unit to just play as a one-off. She's arguably even S tier, but I just don't want to put her right there just yet because there's other units that we're going to talk about. And I think that they have the edge over her Emissary trait by just being better units. Corki, I think Corki's solid A tier as well. Corki is just like really easy to play around. If you have vertical scrap, that is. Artillerist and other lines, he's not as flexible as a lot of other units, but if you have a spot for him, like with vertical scrap, he does pump out damage a lot, and scrap is still quite strong. You could also play him, in some Heimer lines as a dual carry, because you can use the Ezreal with the Heimer to play Corki in the backline. I've seen that done a lot. And he's scrap, which also can help you cap out your board late game. So Corki gets the A tier. I put Mundo in A tier. I think Mundo is like giga strong. I'm a big Mundo believer. I think this Mundo unit, if you set him up properly, either with experimented bruisers or with dominators, he's really hard to kill. He just lives forever, and he also does a decent chunk of damage. He's also, for what he is, he's very uncontested for how strong he is, which I think heightens my opinion of him, because when you see a unit that people aren't playing that much and then you play it and you get like a really easy placement, it's kind of like, okay, well, like, I guess people are not realizing how strong it is, right? But if you're playing flexible, a lot of times, even with Heimer backline, like any AP line, the Mundo really fills in that gap if you're like unable to find a Lowy, if you're unable to find a Elise, but he's just not as strong as some of the other ones, so he gets like the A tier. Echo, I'm down to put Echo in either B or C tier. I feel like it's very hard to play around Echo primary. Yes, he's scrap, so I'm willing to put him in B tier, scrap and ambusher. But the thing is, you're never really like playing your game around like, oh, I'm going to play around Echo today. It's very rare. So he's either C or B. I'm down to put him just in B tier like this. Elise is broken, S tier. Not only is she Black Rose, Form Swapper is massive. She is really good at tanking in the front line. She has a stun in the front line, which stuns can just like sway the fight instantly, right? If Elise jumps on the backline unit, GG. They just don't get to cast anymore for a little bit. It can sway the fight instantly. Elise as a backline unit does a massive amount of damage. Elise is probably the most contested unit. I was saying that in my early guide of like, hey, this is what I think is going to happen during this set. It's nuts. So Elise is definitely S tier. If you see an Elise, you just hold an Elise. You probably have a spot to play Elise. If you ever have a +1 and you need to do extra damage, you can put her in backline. If you need to do extra stun in the front line, like, she's just always able to be played. Garen, I think, is also S tier. He's Emissary, gives HP to his 2 closest allies, like one on his right, one on his left. He lives forever, and if you haven't seen it, like a lot of times, like Declaw, Anomaly Garen, like with a bunch of HP, this unit just doesn't fucking die. And he's Watcher. That's part of the reason why. He's Watcher as well. So this is the 4-cost Watcher unit. Even with 2 Watcher, this guy just doesn't die. He has durability. You give him some healing. He just lives forever. He keeps spinning. He has a shit ton of HP. Like, it's so crazy. So, like, Garen also, like, even if you don't have, like, a spot for it, like, he's so flexible because you just play the Garen and he buffs 2 of your other frontline units to have a bit of more HP. It's like 30% of his HP goes to his 2 closest allies, right? Or his one on his right, one on his left. So it's just a really good bonus. It's really good to cap out around. It's really good to play towards. So, like, what's wrong with him? Nothing. He does everything that he has to do. He's one of the best 4 costs in the game. Heimer's like S or top of A. I'm going to put him here. I think that Heimer, for what he is, I think he's a little bit overplayed. Call me crazy. I think he's a little bit overplayed. I think Heimer is really strong. I think you have to have a very specific item setup to play around Heimer. And I think that because of that specific item setup, it makes it a little bit awkward to play around sometimes. And I think that's why it gets the A tier. But the 4 costs overall have been really balanced. You could argue Heimer is S tier. I just think that, like Heimer 1 is really shit. Heimer 2 is really strong. But, like, a lot of times, like, you know, late game, like, anomalies really help Heimer. But I don't want to rank this based on, like, what the best anomaly is. Because if you don't hit the anomaly, that's, like, you know, not really, like, the unit's fault, you know, like, stuff like that. So, you know, it's somewhere around there. I'm willing to do something like this. Call me crazy. I'm seeing some of the other units. Alawi's A tier because of, I'm going to drop Echo down because I know I need to make room for some other units here. Alawi's A tier for sure. I think that Alawi's really, really good to play around. Very, very strong. Insanely tanky. Has like a little bit of like a Omnivamp healing aspect to her kit. Does a bunch of damage that scales off her armor, and she's Sentinel. You can play her in like 4 Sentinel. You can play her in like 6 Sentinel. You can play her in like Rebels. Basically almost every comp, similar to Elise. It's just Elise is a little bit more flexible because she also can be a backline unit. But she's like at the same tier of contesting as Elise a lot of the times. If you see an Alawi, you just buy the Alawi and you play the Alawi. It's just a giga tank. Very, very strong. Silco, I think, is better than Echo. I think I really like playing around Dominators. I think you can easily play around Silco. If you have a strong front line and you can't find some of the other AP units, Silco is a great plan B. And I think that's really, really strong. So it deserves to he deserves to have like a little spot here. I definitely think that, like, you know, if you're rolling down, I feel like you should play more Silco than you do Echo. Echo is really only good if you're playing Scrap. So it's just that one line. And even when you're playing Scrap, a lot of times you're not primary carrying Echo. You're just trying to primary carry Corki because of the early game items. Echo kind of falls into this weird spot, which is why I want to separate it a little bit. Because even though these are both like equally like not that well played, not that much often played units, there's a little bit of separation. Twitch is A tier for sure. Not broken, but by any means really, really strong. There's many Twitch sniper lines that are really, really good. It's very, very narrow, but he's like the go-to AD unit. Corki is the other one. I think Corki's a little bit better. If I had to like rank them in terms of how strong I think they are, it'd be something like this, right? If I'm ranking in the tier. But Twitch is just very, very strong to play. Bruiser Twitch, Experiment Twitch. It's very, very popular. It's pretty much like the only reliable AD line you can play. Corki is really good if you can hit Scrap, but you have to be relatively uncontested because the Scrap units are usually very often bought, but it's really hard unless you have 6 Scrap to actually make use of Corki. And then you're not really making use of Artillerist that much, so it's a little bit awkward. Vi is D tier. She just fucking sucks. Doesn't do enough damage. She's like really good in certain setups, right? If you have 8 Enforcer, Vi's really good. If you have like 6 Pit Fighter, Vi's pretty good. But it's like, you know, if my grandma had wheels, she'd be a bicycle. You know what I mean? It's like, if we just talk about like, hey, if you have like every freaking vertical trait, you know, it's like I'm sure like Heimer is like Giga SS plus tier if you have 8 Visionary. You know what I mean? It's like if you have a spat, if you're dedicating a spat, you're dedicating your board. It's like, I have a Spat, I have a Caitlyn, I have 8 Enforcer, I have a frontline items, I have Vi items, I have Caitlyn items, and then Vi does well. It's like, well, yeah, like, fuck, like, everybody would do well there. Like, I don't know, I don't get it. I feel like if you just structure your game to play around Vi, it's pretty scary. It's still doable, right? Maybe you can put her in the same tier as Echo, but I think there's enough of a distinction that she's a little bit worse that you can put her there. Zoe's the other AD unit. Very, very strong, does a lot of damage. She's definitely S tier, or A tier, sorry. I find that the forecasts are very well balanced. I think that the problem is like a lot of the shitter units, people are playing around the same like structures, so it makes it feel like some of the forecasts are like, you know, like Heimer obviously is very, very dominant, but Zoe is equally as strong as Heimer. You can like, you know, a Zoe setup can play very, very well. Heimer does cap out a lot higher, but I think that's not relative to his own power level. It's more so relative to the 5 costs, which we'll talk about in a second. But I feel like 4 costs are in a really, really good spot. So this set has been really, really fun. I've been a little bit frustrated recently with my own climb, but that's mostly because of the low cost units and not as much about the high cost units. But either way, that's 4 costs. That's like the main chunky part. Now we're into 5 costs. This one will probably be like a little bit more disparity between some of the units. Caitlyn's like A tier, maybe B tier. I'm only put her in A tier. She just doesn't do that much. You know what? I'll put her in B tier. I'm going to probably separate the 5 costs a little bit more. It's not because the 5 costs are weaker. It's more so like I'm separating them because I want to rank them relative to each other. So please take that into consideration. I'm ranking them against each other, right? I'm not saying that Caitlyn is B, therefore she's as good as Silco. It's more so like Silco is a B relative to these that are A, relative to this that is S, and Caitlyn is B relative to these other 5 costs, right? Caitlyn is just hard to play around. She caps out really high if you're playing around Twitch. She caps out really high if you have 8 Enforcer. but it's just like she doesn't have a good spot unless you like have a dedicated trait for Caitlyn. Like if you get martial law, for example, you have a good spot for martial law, then Caitlyn's really good because it gives you a Caitlyn for free. But it's hard to structure your game around playing Caitlyn. She also feels like she needs very specific items late game, right? She's not like somebody that you can just shove items on and just like have her do a bunch of damage. So that's why she's like B tier. Jace is either S tier or A tier or S tier. I'm gonna put him in S tier. The thing about Jace that's really good is that he just gives you like extra frontline. He gives you like that stupid crystal that can sway the fight so many times. He does a shit ton of damage in the backline. He's Form Swapper Academy, so he can cap out really high with a lot of boards. And it's very easy to shove him in. If you just don't have a unit to play, shove on a Jace, and you get the free crystal, and you get a damage dealer. So it's fine. And if you have frontline items, you put him in the frontline. If you have backline items, you put him in the backline. Typically, you put him in the backline with a lot of those builds, but it's fine. He just does a good amount of damage. He's very, very strong. If you have a Jace 2, you probably are winning the game. So I'm just going to put him in S tier. LeBlanc, I'll put in A tier. It's mostly because of traits. LeBlanc herself doesn't do that much damage. LeBlanc is kind of like a support unit. If you ever think about LeBlanc, don't think like, oh, I have a LeBlanc. I'm going to itemize LeBlanc. I'm going to carry LeBlanc. I'm going to do this with LeBlanc. No. LeBlanc, she does damage. Like, she does damage, yes. She does a lot, and you could itemize LeBlanc. Like, LeBlanc 2 is really good. She's mostly, like, a support, right? A lot of her damage comes from other people doing damage. She's like a damage amp, right? It's like, put the Black Rose chains on everybody, and then, based on how much damage those units take, she then drops a bomb. And then, like, if she kills a unit, it transfers and blah, blah, blah. It's really confusing. But basically, she just marks a bunch of enemies. And if those units take a bunch of damage, she then re-inputs and, like, does extra damage on top based on the original damage that was done. So, like, you know, she's really, really good for that reason. Because if you don't have items, that's the thing. It's not like, oh, I don't have AP items, I can't play a LeBlanc. It's like, it doesn't matter. You can be playing like a Violet with Pit Fighters, and if you have a free spot, just throw a LeBlanc on, and she'll do a lot of damage because she'll amplify, right? That's like the word I'm looking for. She amplifies. So that's why she's really flexible. And then on top of that, she's Black Rose. So like, you know, Black Rose is just really, really strong to play around. Jinx I would also put in A tier. Jinx is kind of like, you know, she's a little bit easier to play around. If you can get the rocket off, she can win the game on the spot. So we'll put her in the same tier over there. Malzahar is S tier. Probably the best 5 cost in the game. Most of the meta revolves around hitting, if you're playing around like the Heimer boards. The reason Heimer is so strong is because it allows you to very easily transition into playing Malzahar late game. Sorry, I think my music stopped, so I'll just go back here for a second. It allows you to very easily play around this Malzahar, which is just like giga broken. It's just very, very strong. So just always be prepared to play around Malzahar. You can just put your Heimer as, like, a Malzahar 1 often does more damage than a Heimer 2. Besides specific situations where the Heimer can scale well enough or with certain anomalies. It's absolutely broken. If you see a Malzahar ever, and you're playing towards AP, the answer is always play Malzahar. So S tier for sure. Mordekaiser is probably an A tier as well. I think Mordekaiser can do a lot. He works as like a frontline unit. You know what? I feel like I should separate some of these. Let's do this. I think I like this better. C for Caitlyn. The Mordekaiser is like the same as Jinx, right? If you have a setup that could support the Mordekaiser, that you're playing around these units already, he'll do a lot for you. If not, then you can't really make use of it. So he's the same as Jinx, very temperamental. Caitlyn's kind of like that, but I think Caitlyn has less opportunities to be played than these ones because of her traits. Rumble is A tier. I think Rumble's really, really strong. Scrap, very, very high value. I think that it's very easy to see Rumble and just play Rumble instantly because of Sentinels. I feel like the other two are a little bit better, Jace and Malzahar, but maybe I'm overvaluing Jace. I've just been seeing Jace do like insane amounts of damage, so the flexibility of Jace is why he gets a little bit higher than Rumble. But Rumble could be S tier, right? I wouldn't you know what, we'll just put Rumble in S tier. Rumble can scale really hard, so like there's sometimes that Rumble could just like 1v9 and Scrap is really good. We'll put Rumble in S tier. I think that's fair. Savika, I think, is in the same spot as Caitlyn. It's very hard to play around this Savika. Savika does a shit ton of damage. She does a lot of work. But I find that, like, unless you're already playing around those particular melee items, she doesn't do that much. I think that she needs very, very heavy sword investment. So she'll just be in the same tier as Caitlyn. Anyways, as final review, these are my 1 costs. Let's just go over it. I don't think anything really changes all that much. I think I kind of agree with what I did here. 2 costs, I think it also agree with how it is kind of here. I think it's fine. 3 costs, like besides shuffling, like anybody that's like top of B or bottom of A, you know, like you can obviously shuffle between the tiers. It's not fully ordered, by the way. Like, you know, I'm not saying that this unit's better than this, right? But it's pretty good. 4 costs, I kind of like this. This is kind of how I feel. I feel like it's Vi, Echo, Silco, like a little bit worse than everybody else, but very, very playable. Everybody's really well balanced in A tier, and then S tier are like the offenders, like really, really overtuned. And then the 5 costs. All right, that's my tier list. Obviously it's early impressions. I might be wrong on something. I've played like 70 games so far. I've watched a lot. I've invested a lot of time this last week or so into it. So I don't think I missed out on anything. Like, there's no niche lines that I haven't seen yet. I think I know of all of them so far. If anything else comes up, I'll be sure to make a VOD about it. And like I said before, make sure to like and subscribe if you like my content. Thank you for watching and have a great rest of the day. Hopefully it was a fun video.